Hello, and welcome to our Being Our Future Best, Designing Effective Teaching and Significant Learning author webinar. My name is Patty Webb, and I am the Marketing Manager for Stylus Publishing. Stylus webinars bring you direct access to our authors and their latest titles. Today, I'm happy to introduce Zala Fashant, Linda Russell, and Karen LaPlant, the co-authors of Designing Effective Teaching and Significant Learning, published in November 2019. The authors have worked with faculty worldwide and share the stories of how faculty have transformed courses from theory to practice, starting with DThink's foundation of integrating course design. Then they provide additional design concepts to expand the course blueprint, to implement plans for communication, accessibility, technology integration, as well as assessment of course design as it fits into the assessment of programs. And they address how faculty can use what they learn to meet their own professional goals. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to lead author Zala Fashant.
Thanks, Patty. Hello, everyone. We truly are coming to you bicontinental at this point. I'm talking to you from Athens, Greece. It's 8 o'clock in the evening here. Linda and Karen are both back in Minnesota at this point, and we travel all over, so we always have to keep doing time zones in our heads. So we welcome you wherever you're from. If you're from Europe, you're from North America, we appreciate that. This opportunity to get a chance to talk with you. We will love for this to be interactive. And so we're going to stop at some places. We'll have you throw some things in the chat room. Most of you are probably familiar with that. Otherwise, if you look in your menu bar, you can find the chat to be able to open that up and to be able to contribute as we go through. So Linda, why don't you start us off with an icebreaker here?
All right. Well, this is a guessing game. So if you would, in the chat, put your best guess as to where this photo was taken. We'll find out a little bit about your geographical knowledge and maybe travel experience if you have been there.
So we will give you one clue, and that is this is actually a world famous landmark.
I saw one thing. New York State.
You're on the right continent.
There you go. Placid Lake. Still the right continent. Wrong state. Ooh. This is one of those places that many of us here in Minnesota visit when we're kids, when our family goes there, because it's sort of exciting to think about. It's a geographical beginning. I did see one right answer.
And this is one of the only places where you can actually walk across this water feature.
Well, should we go to the next one, Zala?
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
It's the headwaters of the Mississippi River at Lake Itasca in Minnesota. It's in northern Minnesota, close to the northernmost point of the Mississippi River, which is actually up in Bemidji, which is where I am from. And so somebody did get it right. And the mighty Mississippi is indeed such an important river in our country that we're happy to have the headwaters. We think it's symbolic that your quality course design and teaching has just as big an impact on your students as this river does on our country. It starts small. You can walk across this. It's only, not even maybe knee deep. You can't believe it if you've ever seen the Mississippi River in St. Louis or New Orleans or somewhere in between where it's wide and the current is strong. It runs deeper and deeper, and you can't walk across it anymore. The compass reference in our logo references design excellence, the way that we guide our teaching and creation of significant learning experience. And here we are. You're Intrepid Authors. This is a group of us. We all work together for the same college system in Minnesota. We all did faculty development work under some of the direction of Zala. And he's the fearless leader that organized us and said, collectively, we have something to offer. We should do something so we can reach wider audiences. Our next slide shows the range of experience that we bring to the book. Lots of involvement with faculty development and teaching and learning, as well as being professors and instructors and administrators in our respective colleges and universities, and a lot of experience outside of our institutions with things like Quality Matters, conference presentations, and so forth. We hope that that serves us well.
And you may wonder, why would we even write this book? Well, each of us had our own reasons, but some of it was to share our knowledge, okay? Some of us like to think of it as a one-stop resource for faculty or administrators and or instructional designers, things we wish we would have had when we started teaching. We wanted to keep developing ongoing resources, and many of us wanted to tell faculty stories about our growth, what we learned, how we learned. We love to share our experiences that help change our teaching practices. We all know we need to increase student success and retention. Many of us felt we wanted to leave some sort of legacy. So we're adding this to the whole idea of Academy. Since publication, the book itself is a process for designing future dual delivery courses, which will respond better to any academic or environmental challenges, such as COVID. It can serve as a text for Online Course Design Institute, where we've helped 250 or more faculty and instructional designers in doing a step-by-step either design or redesign. We've had this as a topic at least 15 national and international conferences, and we've done many campus workshop presentations, well over 400 participants to date.
So inside this book, we decided we really need to practice what we preach here. And we needed to make a book that gave you the structures of the course design ideas based on the DFINC model, which we'll get into. But we also wanted to bring in reality. We have many faculty experiences that are shared here. We have a lot of what we call bright idea teaching tips, which are the things that people have discovered that work great. And so we've got those really highlighted. Every chapter has action checklists so that you can, if you're redesigning a course, you can use the book as a tracking device for yourself, that you've taken care of all these things. And you've got places in the book to just, we've said, jot your thoughts. At certain moments, you might have a reaction or a few ideas. And so we put all that into the book to make it as practical and useful for you as we can possibly think of. The QR code here, it takes you to the website on the Stylus page. That's fine, go ahead.
All right, so we're going to stop and just take a look at a few things here that have gone on in the last year and a half. And of course, this book came out just a couple months before COVID decided to rear its ugly head. And so one of the things that I remember, we were actually at a conference presenting on faculty development, and we were talking about this whole thing when the book literally came out hot off the press and walked into our room. So that we had a chance to be able to share that with the participants at the conference. One of the things that was really most interesting that we found is that we really wanted to take a look at this backward versus forward-looking teaching model that was out there. And so when we think about backwards teaching, it's this whole idea of teaching the way that we were taught. It's making classrooms that the way we taught sometimes maybe, or the way that we learned sometimes 30, 40 years ago, and we're still teaching that same way, even though that we're working with students who we know don't have, that jobs haven't even been created yet in some of the areas that we're going to be doing this. And so really looking forward, getting us an opportunity to be able to break this down, to be able to look at some polycentric thinking about being inclusive and diverse ways of learning. And of course, we'll talk about more of those things as we go through here. And obviously, we wanted faculty, as we've worked with them and as they've talked with us, really to be able to have the freedom to design curriculum, simply not pick publishers, content, and materials. And nothing against Stylus, because they've got fantastic books, but when it comes to actually books you're going to use, texts you're going to use in the classroom, part of those types of things got to be driven by other people, and not the expertise of the faculty or the instructional designers that are putting this together. And so we really wanted people to begin looking at branching off and forward-looking teaching and using that kind of a model instead for the future. So what is significant learning? Actually, I find it interesting. It's a question that we throw out there. We have it in the title, and yet it's been a question that no one's ever asked me when we've done the workshops and we've worked with faculty on that. But really, when you stop and take a look at this sort of definition, and you can read it to yourself now, it really kind of comes down to this idea that we are not, we really want learning that's going to instill change. And as we take a look at it, it's really looking beyond what's happening at the end of a course and just getting to a course and giving a grade and moving students on to the next semester and the next set of courses that are in your curriculum. It's really going to be transformational, and we're going to really want them to be able to use it, not only to complete their program, but then again, how can we change and make things happen for them in their personal and professional lives when they get into the workplace. So this is the cycle of course design, and the cycle of course design really is kind of a book map as well. And so today what we're going to be doing is walking through this with you. We're going to be showing you the elements that are in here and the things that we talk about that are actually in the book that we've used in our online workshops. And so we'll start in the lower left-hand corner and we'll move around clockwise to be able to sort of really break this down. So here's the idea. The left-hand side of this model is designing significant learning. This is the model. DFINC used part of this in the past. And as you know, we've worked with, some of us have worked very closely with D, and we've had the opportunity to spend some time really talking with him about this. But in the last about 5 or 6 years, there's been so much more that has happened beyond D's model from back in the early 2000s and to things that we want to make sure that we're using in the design principles today. And those things will include sort of this top tier of design communication, the accessibility of the learning technologies. And these are pieces that faculty really needed to put into their courses, especially during this time. This stuff will all provide significant learning. It also provides a grade for students. However, it produces a lot more. And that's what we'll want to spend some time talking about today is what else do you get out of this design factor? When you look at the right-hand side, we're really looking at assessing effective teaching. These are the ways of using course quality, assessing deeper student learning besides just determining grades, but really looking at learning progress, looking at the ways students are advancing in their programs, and are you meeting the goals for program or department assessment, the institutional assessment that we go through here. And we begin to look at how people have tightened and institutions have really tightened this up in the last probably 10 years, where we're starting to create a common plan. Finally, all of this information gives you as a faculty member an opportunity to take a look at your teaching practice, the course reflection, and the learning how to learn professional development type of things that you're going to want to be able to do. And so all of this comes together to, again, form this cycle of course design. So let's take a look at the first section of the book, which we call starting. And so in starting, we'll look at situational factors back here in the lower left-hand corner. So when we're working with people in this online course design workshop, and we're giving you the opportunity to read through the early chapters in the book, this is chapter 1 basically, we start talking about the ways that there are situational factors that really impact your course. Those things can all be seen in the left-hand diagram, rather small. We'll blow a couple of these up. One of them really starts to get to be what we focused on a lot lately has been the characteristics of learners and the characteristics of the teacher or the instructor for this course. And so this is where we get a wonderful chance to start blending in culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy. We get this forward-looking reflection in the planning stages of how all of this can come together. You notice we didn't start with outcomes. We didn't start with, tying in activities. We didn't start with assessments. We really started in this planning stage. And a lot of faculty that we've been working with during this pandemic time have really told us before that they didn't start at this spot. They started with getting their hands in the soil to start gardening right off the bat. They didn't really take the time to start thinking about what this needs to be. And especially if you're looking at a brand new course or you're looking at doing a major redesign of a course, these are going to be incredibly important. And so that is really an important factor that we think is becoming even more and more. Now, we didn't actually write a chapter on the culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy because we really want it to be woven throughout. And so as we do tutorials and facilitations, we talk about how this is woven throughout each of the chapters in the book, and why it's important to be able to make sure that it's intentional and it's deliberate, that you've got that in place so that we can really look at that, so you can identify what learners are expecting as they're coming and sitting in your courses, what they can gain the most from, and you yourself as an instructor, what you get to gain from, and maybe even identify a few biases that you have towards some of the things that are going on within your discipline and in your course design. Linda?
Yeah, one of the aspects of the characteristics of learners and teachers in this situational factors part of the process that we started to discuss with faculty more is this notion of introversion and extroversion. The way people interact with each other, the way people approach the class, whether it's in person or whether it's online, is really part of that aspect of one's personality. And although nobody is extremely usually one way or the other, we have some tendencies that we are comfortable with, and that affects our learning and it affects our teaching quite a bit. In fact, a lot of college teachers are actually introverts, which seems funny since you're in front of people all the time, but as compared to elementary teachers who are largely extroverts. So how does this affect our work with students? And one of the things that COVID did, putting things online, is that in fact it allowed people to think about, how can I involve my introverted students more? And we talk a little bit about this in this article that Zala and I put together for Inside Higher Ed. And if you've ever read Susan Cain's book called Quiet, she talks about how the world is really for extroverts, and people are evaluated based on, well, if they only could, be more extroverted, they could be more successful. And in fact, the world is made up of all ranges of people, and we can reach them. So we think it's important in this new environment to consider that layer in terms of involving students, allowing some time for those quieter people to think before they have to speak. It's a completely different dynamic when you're online. And sometimes what we are finding is that the introverted students actually really thrive because, in fact, they're not in competition to raise their hand, instantly in a classroom. They get the time to think, they get the time to prepare what they're going to say, which is more comfortable for them. And extroverts are forced actually to wait and listen. And sometimes they're busy being extroverted and they don't stop to do that. So it's an aspect of considering your student learners and your own self and what you prefer. So we urge you to give that a little bit of thought.
All right. So what we end up doing is we ask people to really start to put together this big dream. And one of the things that we oftentimes do is we, as faculty, we share our philosophy of education or a philosophy of teaching, and we do those kinds of things. But by really creating in course design this big dream for your course, you're really creating a mission statement. And you're really saying, this is what everything is going to be all about. And the idea of having this big dream mission statement is to be able to take away those questions like, how am I ever going to use this course? Why do I need to learn this stuff? Okay, and those are questions that all of us who have been teachers for years and years have heard. And so we really get that out in front. And that becomes one of the critical things that we share with students right off the bat. So during this pandemic time, and we're calling it the pandemic pedagogy, we really wanted to take a look at what are some of the things that faculty needed to do to be able to retool and reflect upon what was going on. Most of us got to that emergency remote teaching stage, and we had to quickly do something and get something ready to go by the time the spring break was over, or by the time the next semester was starting and you were taking a look at this course. So what we've been really focusing on with faculty is this idea of creating dual delivery courses so that you can pivot easily, so that when the next normal comes along, the next pandemic, in Greece and in California and other places in the US, you've had tremendous fires that have disrupted education. We've had the opportunity to take a look at earthquakes. We have snowstorms in Minnesota, as some of the rest of you do. And so as we begin to take a look at that, you can easily switch between a face-to-face model with an online model and be able to do that by designing with one structure. You don't have to have 2 different or 3 different courses by the time you include hybrid with that, or blended courses. So what we're going to ask you to do right now is, when you look about the situational factors and you think about what you've been through during this last year and a half with the pandemic and the fact that it's still going on, we're still asking people, do we mask or don't we mask? Are we meeting face to face? How are you running your courses? I'd like you to use some time in the chat tool to go ahead and share with us some of your experiences of the changes that you made in your teaching. And we'll give you just a couple of minutes to do that, and we'll share a few of those. And the whole chat, we will scrub names and everything that way and post it with a takeaway that you can use as you go forward and you use this information. Some of the things that faculty have shared with us in our work together has been this idea that they realized that they needed to adjust due dates. They needed to take a look at the timing of things, because online meant different timelines sometimes than face-to-face did. They take a look at the whole idea of their own thinking adjustments that came up there. Karen, do we have anybody that's contributed? I see there's a few more people in chat here.
Oh yes, we've got several in here now. Changed the way I structured the calendar in my syllabus, added more detail since I couldn't remind my students every day. I gained more trust for the e-learning environment, more cognizant of the outside factors in student lives, more flexibility in my deadlines. I use micro lectures, pre-recorded, much more now, and live with my students solely for application and activities. Individual conversations with students during the semesters with more videos and micro lectures. Never take in-person time for granted.
I think that's one of the things that we all started to take a look at, why that's important. And we sort of realized what we lost. And so we needed to find a way to be able to create that in the online environment, because those are important learning tools. Those are important strategies that we know that students will do this. So let's now take a look at where most people start, the designing of the course itself. And so as you can see in this area, we're going to look at this strategic alignment between the outcomes, the learning activities, feedback and assessment, and all the parts that come into that piece, as well as the assessing student learning when it comes to how our students are able to do things and how they're progressing. So as we keep learning on, we can see that in 2013, DFINC was really looking at this piece of it. You can see we've added more to that spot, but it becomes really important. And this is backwards design that he really spoke about. That becomes important, where he had learning goals, and then you next put together the assessment so that you make sure that you're really assessing those learning goals. And then finally, you bridge those two using the teaching and learning activities that are involved there. One of the things that we've really determined in working with faculty, and we've worked with 2-year, 4-year, technical college, community college, graduate faculty, as we've done with all of this, what the pandemic really started to press on to us was the think model works out extremely well, because in one model, you can do a lot of different things. Sure, Bloom is well known and Bloom is great, but Bloom has the cognitive side, and Fink has, and Bloom also has the affective side, which doesn't get a lot of press. Usually it's the pyramid that we take a look at with Bloom. But what Dee did is he put together this cognitive side and this affective side. And so when you're looking at designing a course, many people are wanting to see how students are going to be able to work within an environment, working with others, the idea of what their values are going to be in the caring area, and then how are they going to continue to learn once they've graduated from your program. Does that include going from a 2-year to a 4-year? Does that include 4-year undergraduate to a graduate program? How is it they're going to continue to learn? Or even just reading journals and what information is going to be coming their way so that they can continue to learn. So that's why we tend to use this, because it works extremely well. Most of the time, the faculty that we've worked with has designed courses with the Bloom taxonomy, and it's great. But once they really started to see this, they also started to realize, hey, this gives me all those pieces that I really want to do that. And in Fink's model, we use all of the domains in a particular area. So in a course, we will have all 6 of these domains in a course represented by the outcomes we created. So we give people this 3-column table, and this is what we talk about how to do this, and we work this through in the book itself. But you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got the foundational knowledge, we have application, we have integration, those cognitive areas. And this is where we start to take a look at the dual delivery of the assessment, for instance, or in learning activities. What are you going to do in a face-to-face situation? What are you going to do in an online situation? And how do you start to break those up? And how is it that they might be similar, or how will they be the same based on the kinds of tools that you can use? In working with faculty during the pandemic, we also realized that we changed that from sort of a 3-column table to now a 6-column table, because they wanted to have room for unit objectives and competencies, because some of you work with programs that those become extremely important. We also wanted to keep track of the time and the resources needed for assessments, because time got to be a very important type of thing to be able to do in the pandemic and the changes you were needing to make. And so were the resources you were going to have to come up with. Same thing happens with learning activities, so that we can look at the time and the resources needed. Linda, why don't you talk for just a minute about what we included in the book and how we address developmental education and English as a second language set of students.
About that, I will unmute. In chapter 5 and also in Appendix B, we address these 2 areas. Depending on your type of institution and your student body, you may be very familiar with students who have come through developmental ed or English as a second language into your coursework, or it may be happening simultaneously in some cases. So sometimes people think about, what do I need to do differently for those students who might not be as academically prepared or might still be struggling with some language issues? And what we promote here is the idea that many of the solutions to what is perceived to be these problems are things like closed captioning, or using advanced organizers, using some kind of recordings, like some of you have mentioned in the chat just now, more explicit directions, that sort of thing. There's some others using more models, exemplar models, where so students can really see what kind of expectations you have, being very explicit about expectations. Breaking a large project into smaller pieces. Those are all things that really make a huge difference for the less prepared students or the less familiar students with our environment. However, They are great for everybody else. They do no harm. In some cases, different students have different strengths and different areas needing more work, and they can really pick up on things that will help them a lot. So we really felt like these techniques apply to everybody. So now, if you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences of some changes you made in course design that might get at the knowing your students. I can keep an eye on this as well. Pops up.
Some of the things faculty shared with us in the past has been this idea that they kind of really started combing through their courses to look to see what wasn't as essential as what they had once thought it had been, which I thought was a huge revolution and revelation.
Yeah. So some of the comments were that they narrowed their assignments. They use more targeted assessments, and this may also mean that they started thinking about multiple types of assessment, maybe not the same thing, more interactivity, more self-assessment. I see a comment in the chat, having an ESL student and an ASL or deaf student in the same course. And that I'll tell you, when you don't have very many and suddenly you get a student that has a significant learning difference or set of needs, that really drives home what works and what doesn't, and what you might need to pay attention to. And Karen is going to talk about some of this when she talks about accessibility measures that should help that situation. Another
area that we thought was quite interesting is people really wanted to take a look at, how do I make my course more fun? I want it creative. I want it to be able to be motivating, because sometimes this is the one time you want people to get a break during their day. And this might be their best part of their day during the pandemic, when they're feeling all the pressures and suffering the way that they have been suffering during this time period of trying to learn. And so that was another good thing there. Let's see, we got a couple of more additions.
Additional videos. Having students do videos, that's a really active approach.
Let's take a look, and we're going to hand it over to Karen and really talking about this idea of the communication that needed to take place and why this has become such a critical piece. And you can think about your own communication, what you had to change during this past year and a half. So Karen?
Yes, this is the chapter about course communication. Course communication, I feel, is one of the most important parts of your course design. And it needs to be not just how much you throw at them, okay, but intentional communication. Students are bombarded just as we are with text messages, with various apps, with emails. And so it's not the quantity of what you send, it's the quality, okay? So course community is an engagement. You build it through this intentionally designed communication, okay? Many faculty we've talked to in the last year and a half hadn't thought to create this course communication pathway, as we're calling it. And once you create one for one course, not that every course would be identical that you teach, but it gives you some ideas of things to do, how to welcome your students and by what method. And there's so many different methods, if you're using a learning management system, usually you have some sort of course announcements. You may have course notifications. You may have the ability to have an app like Desire to Learn. The one I've been using has a Pulse app. You have text messaging. You have course discussion tools. You may have a way to group your students. Of course, you would have an email, and you might have what D12 calls an intelligent agent, which lets you automate sending based on criteria. So any way that you can think of to have this intentional course communication between you and your students, and at various times of the semester. I think you need to, before the semester, of course, during the semester, and at the end. And during the semester, if you set up something like every week on Monday, I'm going to send you out something, or if they know when to look for an announcement or an email or a text message, however, let the student choose which way they're going to get these messages. because by email, many of our students just are not reading email anymore. So announcements or text messages or apps may be the way to go. So for question 3, we'd like you to share your experiences of the changes you made with students, especially when you went online. A lot of people had to make a lot of different kind of changes because you didn't see them anymore. And as someone put before, you can't really remind them. So you had to do it by some other method. Okay, so if you'd share what worked, what you changed with your students, possibly between online and how it was on campus, we'll give you a minute or two to think about how you did this.
Karen, this is one of the, I was going to say, Karen, this is one of the things that when we've talked with faculty, you know, it seems like, oh, sure, that makes a lot of sense. But yet at the same time, people really didn't create a communication plan. And so in the book, and as we work with people in our learning situations, we really talk about the ways that they can do this. And now, especially like what you mentioned, you have ways that you can be able to share this. You have ways that are automated. You have ways that are that will do this for you so you don't forget, and that you're at the end of a week and you're trying to react to 25 emails that are all demanding your time at one time. So you can get out in front of it and be proactive on it. Anything in the chat, Karen?
Yes, there's some friendly reminder email messages and announcements, or regular announcement reminders about due dates. You know, if your learning management system has any kind of automated things, they are really nice. That what it does is it frees up your time, in my opinion anyway, frees up your time to deal with those students that need more individual help, more personalized help. Because many of our students, you know, they're doing well, and you just have to give them a little, and you can use it as a, you know, you're on the right path, keep it up, or, you know, or you can give them a little nudge. I see you didn't score so well on that. Perhaps, you know, perhaps you want to reach out or review the material, or, you know, you can make it more personalized too. One of the people said, one of my faculty does Monday memos. As a department chair, I send out a welcome email to all students taking our course. Students keep that email, and I usually hear from them with questions or thanks. So yes, nice. Monday memos, you know, any catchy thing that they're going to know that a certain time of day or a certain day of the week that they can expect to hear from you, versus bombarding them every day. So have a plan. The next area we're going to go into is accessibility. And as Linda said, many of the things we do not just for what we used to call accommodations, we do for all learners, okay? So course accessibility is a law, and it's for all learners. They don't have to have a declared disability or anything, okay? So everything is required to be accessible. Every website, as you can see, what the state of Minnesota does, we have an Office of Accessibility that'll show you how to do documents or maps or social media, meetings, multimedia. And it says, you know, you have to be accessible. Now, this doesn't just help those people that need accommodations. It's helped some of my adult learners that were dyslexic and never had help through high school or middle school or high school. It helps those that, like I said, come from another country and they're just learning our language, or, you know, or enlarging their vocabulary. So it helps all students. And even the closed caption, I've had students that would much prefer to look at something and look at the captions first, and then go in and look at the video, or perhaps look at a slideshow after they've read a chapter, or perhaps before. Many students do not know how to take notes from reading. So, you know, a slideshow that's accessible could be the answer for them. So any of these ways are ways that, like I said, you have to make sure that all learners are accessible. Okay, and it's especially important now that we've been online for quite a while. So our next question we'd like you to share in the chat. This is question 4, is sharing the experiences you've had with changes you've made because of course accessibility and accommodations for students in the next minute or two.
This has sort of the whole accessibility thing now, because of pandemic situations, has almost 2 parts. We have sort of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, making sure that course materials are all accessible. And yet at the same time, we really need to take a look at How is your course accessible? How do students who suddenly lost the ability to get to the library, who lost internet connections, who lost everything that way, how can they move to an online situation? And so sometimes campuses have been having deep discussions about what they needed to do to be able to help students remain accessible. They need to keep them connected. So we almost want to take a look at connectivity perhaps instead of accessibility at that point. So if you have other ideas and things that your campus did as great tips to be able to share about the kinds of ways that you make things accessible, that you make sure that you put these things in place for all of your students, and at the same time in the online situation, and then at the same time, how did you keep your students connected? What kinds of tips and tricks did your campus decide to use for that?
So we have several things in the chat. One is that they use TextRead for all their LMS postings. It's automatic. And I also use closed captioning for all my videos and micro lectures. Someone else says ensuring the closed caption availability, use more variety in media. The text to speech read is wonderful. And like I said, it's not just for students that need accommodations. Many students prefer to hear the written word. So you have many of them out there. Some of them can be integrated in your LMS, like ReadSpeaker. You have others like Read Write Gold that is a floating menu on any student's computer, and it can translate, it can read it to them, it can go in different dialects, it can have male or female voices. You know, there's the speed they can change. So it gives the student a little more personalized approach to their own learning. Another person said, my online class had an accessibility review and I received so many tips to improve my class. I'm using less tables in Word. I make sure to have a title on my videos instead of just the links, closed captioning, etc. Yes, if you go through an accessibility review, that is wonderful. There's many accessibility programs that can be integrated into your LMS. I know I'm using one now called Ally. That's a Blackboard product, but we're using it in D2L Brightspace. So there's many things like this that will go through and tell you what you could do better. And those are great too.
Which leads us right into sort of the learning technologies at this point, some of the things that we're able to do that. So Karen, why don't you talk about those?
Okay, learning technologies. My favorite is to say, to tech or not to tech. Do you really need to do it? Okay, so assess what you need. So we don't want anyone to add a learning technology just because it's a learning technology and it might be fun. It should really enhance your course and improve the student learning, okay? So sometimes it's a simulation. It could be technology that they're going to use in the workplace or in the field when they leave. Something that's going to help them remember the skills they've learned, or we know that active learning will help student retention and engagement. So certain technologies do stand to help them. So like I said, we'd like you to share any experiences you've made with learning technologies. You know, if you have integrated them or haven't, and why you have, and kind of what you've learned from it. We're sharing with each other here. So what do you think?
These can be taking place for both asynchronous and synchronous learning. So your idea of using web conferencing, Zoom, etc., those kinds of pieces, as well as the asynchronous tools that you've been able to use.
Yeah, do you do any polling software? You know, years ago, we used to use clickers a lot. Well, there's lots of ways to do it now with your smartphone. There's just tons of things to do that you can still get the same student engagement and interaction. I'm wondering if anybody has tried any of them. So somebody used Otter to create transcripts of their lecture videos. They also use Blackboard Collaborate, Ultra, Zoom, and even Yammer for a faculty group. Interesting.
Let's take a look at the assessing pieces right now. And like I said, we'll have the chat listed up there so that you can all go back and see more of these kinds of technologies and things that way that your colleagues are using. And we'll put that up for you to be able to access after the presentation is over. So the third part of our book is the assessing part. And of course, this really, like I explained before, takes a look at everything on the right-hand side. The first area is going to be course quality. So one of the things that as we work faculty development, people wanted to know, hey, is my course any good? You know, how am I doing? What's going on with that? Which I also find is the same thing that we get from our students. How are we doing? You know, am I doing well enough in this course? What's happening? So we all have that inquisitive approach to wondering what's out there. So let's just quickly take a look at some of the informal assessments that people can do. One, you can test drive your course. Let someone else take a look at it, get a new set of eyes on those. You can measure the quality as you teach. So we have sort of these ideas of self-created surveys and evaluations that you can give out every couple, 3 weeks throughout the course to get a feeling for what's happening. You can write reflective course shell discussions where you get students telling you what they're experiencing and what they're going through and what they're learning from in the materials that you've presented. The whole idea of forward-looking assessments and the cats and lats, so where you get people really starting to take a look at what it is that they're going to, how they're going to use this, how they're going to be able to integrate this in the future, whether it's additional courses in your curriculum or in the workplace. How can they see that? You, of course, have, after you get done teaching, you've got institutional course evaluations, and you have sort of this whole assessing quality as your design. You're looking at some of the self-assessing course design rubrics that are out there. Under formal assessments, again, you have end of course surveys, you have things like quality matters, you have peer-reviewed course design. Some of you have done some of those things within your departments as you've looked at one another's courses. And of course, you have maybe those of you in technical programs and to your colleges, advisory councils that review your curriculum. You have, of course, accreditation visits and program review. All of those will help you give a formal assessment, but there's a lot of things that you can do for, as I call it, for free, things up front as you're really taking a look at improving your course. In the book, we created these. It's something that we used that blended some QM stuff along with some DFINC stuff, along with stuff that we had created for our own faculty to use. So we broke it down. We talked about the different elements and what people could do so they could, this is one that we wrote and actually test drove it with a couple of two-year colleges in Minnesota. So they had a chance to take a look at their programs. This is whether or not you're doing it for the credit side, or if you're doing it in customized training, the same kind of information can be done and looked at. So right now, what I'd like you to do is if you can go back and share some of your experiences. How did you assess your course? When you were going through the pandemic, how did you get a feeling for if you were hitting the mark, especially for those of you who were in a face-to-face situation and you moved to an online situation, or that you were starting to feel the stress from students in online teaching that you have gone through before? What did you do to sort of assess the quality of the course that your students were getting that significant learning experience?
I think another way to think of this is how did you think about maintaining the integrity of your course under very different, maybe new circumstances for you? It's always, always a concern.
That's great, because people were worried that they were just fluffing it up and getting through it, and but they didn't want to do it that way. Karen, any comments?
QM, I see.
Using QM expectations for self-assessment. Many places use QM, So you don't even have to go through a formal, you can use it as a self-assessment or peer review, ask someone else to review your course for you or worked as a team.
One of the things Karen did on one of our campuses was they designed a sort of a little bit of a boot camp for people, and then they had the opportunity to mentor someone who'd been through a QM review, mentored someone who wanted to think about going through a QM review, and that worked extremely well to get a feeling for some of the things that needed to be in a course. for students to gain and improve on.
If you're not sure what QM, it's just quality matters.
All right, so let's take a look at assessing student learning. And again, like I said before, yes, it meant getting a grade and giving that type of thing, but it really goes into much more than that. So as you can see, we know there's a lot of things. I think one of the biggest thing in assessment that doesn't take place is the reflective assessment. We sort of teach it, students do it, they take a test on it, or they get assessed on it some way. And then we move on to the next thing because the semester's flying by. And so what happens is we don't really gain as much from reflective assessment as is possible. And so when you take a look at we give a lot of different ways that you can use reflective assessments in almost all of these areas that you have seen in this book map that we've been showing you. There's places for reflective assessment in all of it, and you gain so much from what's really happening in your classes. And so at any rate, we're going to take a look at the last bullet, the auditive versus educative. And so as we do that, Linda, would you walk us through that?
Certainly. So on the left side, auditive assessment is really the kind of traditional assessment that you would see in school. It looks backwards to see what students learn, and they end up with a grade, and you end up with a grade book that shows you how your students did. But educative assessment is involving the dimensions of the Fink model. You'll see up at the top right, all those domains are there. It includes these four kinds of things that look forward, which are things that assess how students plan to use the learning, what they're hoping to do, maybe in their careers or in their next phase of their education. Self-assessment, which encourages that reflective component. Of course, we have to maintain that integrity. So the criteria and standards are a very important component here that you figure out for your course, and you develop those rubrics that will help you identify where a student falls. And then this fidelity feedback, which stands for frequent, this is DFINK, frequent, immediate, discriminating, which is based on criteria. And he calls it loving, and we think of it as respectful feedback. We understand that students are in a zone of learning. You can't learn without making mistakes. Every course has its trouble spots to have to take extra time. And so that kind of feedback that is really as quick as possible so that students can get themselves on track results in what you see at the bottom, really more authentic assessment, so that the grades actually are more authentic as well. They mean something. Some of the faculty changes that we have heard from in this new time have to do with changing some of their methods of feedback and so forth. And so we're wondering if you also have experienced strategies that you use that were different or new during the last year and a half or so. This is for assessing student learning. I'm wondering if you had experienced needing to change things like hard deadlines or late work policies or taking makeup tests or things like that might have gotten messed up because you had so many students who couldn't control their time so well. Anything like that? I see somebody says, I no longer use quizzes. I now use more self-reflective writing where students tell me what matters to them most in their learning. Someone said, now I like this comment, Rachel. I did not really have the bandwidth to explore changes to my assessment. You know, I'll tell you, everybody has been so stressed out. I hear you. We all hear you. You can only take in so many things to change at one time. And so you have to do what you can do. I appreciate your honesty there, and I'm sure you've got a lot of absolutely's coming from the rest of the group. Oh, I like the before times mentioned too. There'll always be before COVID and after COVID, won't there?
Yes.
Small changes, some incremental changes. Okay, here's one of being more flexible, allowing students to turn in work. One of the things that I wonder about is some of us all have been thinking that those hard deadlines are super important because that's what life is all about. And I have a feeling that this situation may have changed our views about that and realize that maybe flex time, flex opportunities might really be the way to go. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the program and department and institutional assessments.
And I think part of what we've learned is to be more compassionate. I mean, that's what I've heard from hundreds of faculty that we've presented to, that we've worked with, is that sometimes those hard and fast rules, they realized students were going through everything that they were trying to get through, running families, trying to get to work, trying to live, and not get COVID, and trying to work with everything you're doing at school. And I think what we've learned is we all needed to be more compassionate. And as faculty, you were struggling with a lot of things, and campuses were struggling with so much. So I think what we've learned is maybe we got a little gentler, we got a little bit easier, and started to look at each other more as humans and less as getting things done type of thing. Well, what we're going to do is just, again, talk about the importance of every type of assessment, whether it's unit assessments in your course, to the course outcome assessments, to the course surveys, which lead then to department assessments or program assessments, which lead to institutional assessments and accreditation. All of these form this sort of micro to macro assessment framework. And one of the things we don't have a lot of time to talk about at this point, but it really is, how do we create that pathway of linking so that you know when you're doing a unit assessment, you know where it falls in your department or program assessment, and you know how that is played out in your institutional assessment. So some of the things that you're doing in your course can really go to show that you're doing the things that your department and program say you're going to be doing. And of course, it says that your college-wide learner outcomes are being met as well. And so that you can go to alumni, you can go to employers, you can go to accreditation agencies, and you can show them this linear assessment pattern that becomes extremely important. And so if you're not doing it and you're in the process of doing it, it takes a lot of work, and we know that. We're going to skip the question at this point because I'm just keeping an eye on time. And I want to take just a moment to let Linda talk a little bit about the reflection in the teaching practice and course reflection, as well as the learning how to learn through professional development.
Yes, the reflection of practice cycle starts kind of anywhere, however, where you are in there, and it's used to reflect on your teaching and also assess your teaching and your professional development, so that you are always growing and not just growing in a straight line, but growing in a reflective practice model. So you learn from your pedagogy, you try it out in your courses, you assess the effectiveness by using feedback and so forth. You make mid-course adjustments. Perhaps you share with colleagues. I hope you do. That's a really marvelous way, and especially if you can get outside of your department and get talking with people in different disciplines. You get good ideas that way. Reflecting on the teaching and on the student learning, coming back to, are there more resources and so forth. It's really an ongoing thing. One of the things that some of our faculty like to use is some kind of I used to call it my teach better file. And when I would run into something midstream, I didn't have time always to do that kind of reflection, but I would jot down my thoughts at the moment and stick them in this. It was an electronic file, so that I would, between semesters and so forth, go back and say, what did I notice didn't work that well in this particular area in my course or whatnot? And I would have time to do that. So do we have time for this one, Zala?
I think, well, we don't really have time for it. So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is,
Right.
Again, we know that from faculty, what they've told us is that there's been a lot of different ways and they're feeling pretty comfortable of this on their campuses. They've got some resources. They don't have as many as they'd love to. And of course, with cuts and whatnot, we've lost some centers for teaching and learning, but there's a lot of things out there for people to do. And obviously, some of you took that time to come and visit with us today on this. So what we'd like to do is thank you for joining us today. We want to keep an eye on the time. We're going to stay here for a few minutes and talk with you. I'm going to suggest you take a photo of this page. Never, told people to do that before, but there's a lot of good information on here. And there is the book QR code. And again, you can get a 20% discount on that. And we'll let Patty talk more about that. Another thing is go to encoreprodev.com, because there's a lot of other things. There's other chapters that we didn't put in the book that are there, they're written, and you can contact any one of us to talk to us about different things that have gone on. And I'm going to turn it back over to Patty.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you to our authors for sharing their time, and for everyone who came in live with us today. If you are interested in ordering Designing Effective Teaching and Significant Learning, use code DETSL2 to get 20% off the book and free shipping from Stylus Publishing. I'll also share the link.
Patty, was that
yes.
2 or 20?
2, DTSL2.
Okay.
And I will share that in the chat bar. The webinar video replay will be available by Friday and shared on all of our Stylus social media platforms. The presentation slides are also available to download off of the book page, and those are available now. If you have any feedback on this webinar or any requests for future webinars, please feel free to email us directly at stylusinfo@styluspub.com. All right, and I will stay on a bit longer as well in case you guys have any more questions for our authors or want to copy anything from the chat bar. You will have access to the chat transcript as well, and that will be included in our follow-up email.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening if you're here in Europe. We can do some open mic things too if anybody wants to ask a question directly.
We do have a question in the Q&A from Sandra McGuire, if you'd like to read that out loud.
Right.
Hi, Sandra. Nice to see you in there. I'll read it. It says, in Fink's model, the learning how to learn domain in the taxonomy of significant learning refers to developing self-directed learners by teaching students how to learn. It appears that we've interpreted it as related to faculty development. We split that up, actually. Zala, would you like to tackle that one? You're right. Fink is talking about learning how to learn, and we did also apply that to faculty. With the promoted idea of faculty development being a significant part of the whole package of significant learning and teaching.
So we added on. Yeah, we talk about it in the learning how to learn with the student model, and to create the domain for students to be able to create activities or to create a thought process in which they're going to talk about that. But we also know that faculty do the very same thing. And faculty, having been a dean, one of the things that happens is faculty are coming to me and saying, hey, this is what I'm seeing. I want to get some help in what I need to do to be able to improve these things. How do I learn more about that? And so we added that as a piece when it comes to the cycle of sort of course design / faculty development, being in there, because that's what is usually the motivator for faculty to then say, I need to redesign this course. I learned these new things. I'm going to move them over, and I want to redesign my course.
Got you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that. And the reason I asked the question, I was really surprised because I know Dee, we've worked together, and he had told me that he specifically put that part in because he thought it was so important for faculty to be able to teach students the strategies to become self-directed learners as a way to improve their ability to achieve the learning outcomes that the faculty have put forth in the different domains. And so
Yes.
I think that it is really, really important for faculty to understand and actually have strategies for, in addition to they're reflecting on what they're doing, they're teaching and learning, moving it forward, to really address head on those ways of teaching students, metacognitive learning strategies, ways that students can really uh, assume their role in the learning process in a way that
Yes.
students don't really know how to do. And I think in the pandemic age, it's really even more important because students are having to take even more control over their learning.
Well, I think
No,
that's oh,
Sandra,
guys,
we also talk, oh, I'm sorry. I think we
go
got a
ahead,
lag.
Linda.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Zala. We
Oh.
talk about disciplinary literacy too in this context, Sandra. And the idea that faculty can think about and be more explicit about, this is how we learn in this discipline. This is what constitutes evidence. This is how we make an argument, that kind of thing. And I think that's an integral part of the sharing back and forth between an expert in a discipline and the novice learner in order to be able to learn how to learn. You can just spin your wheels if you try to apply the methods that worked in your sociology class in your physics class. It may not work. So that's why it's so significant to share that type of, this is how we do things in this discipline, this is how we write and so forth.
And I think part of what we do when we're actually doing course design with them and we're modeling that with them, and we're talking about that, because we're giving them the same feedback. There is a section in that sort of 6-column table that breaks that down, and they actually come up with a plan for what they want their students to do from that course for future learning and to be able to continue to learn. So that is there. And in that place, one of the things that really makes that become sort of important, because sometimes that can appear, it's a little fluffy, you know, is it ever going to happen? That kind of a thing. What's interesting is when faculty start to do that for themselves and they start to think about their professional development plans, the things that they need to go over with their dean, their ideas of what they want to learn more about. Hence, that's why we kind of put the action checklists in as well, is that there are things you can't change right now. You're going to need to go back, you need to look up, you need to get some more information. You're going to need to do it. And once faculty start to realize that they do this and they think that's important, because they know they want to go to discipline conferences, teaching and learning conferences, read periodicals and journals and those kinds of things to keep up with all the latest, greatest changes. When they're doing that, they start to realize why that is so critically important for their students to do that as well. And we get no pushback on that. They start to realize, yes, I want my students to continue learning. And you know that too. You know that, you know, we all want our students to keep growing after they leave us. So I think that's what's really critical. So I love your point and I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Anyone else that would like to talk and bring up anything and discuss?
All right, if we have no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and close out this webinar. Thank you all so much for participating, and thank you to all of our attendees for coming in live. Again, you will get all of the links in a follow-up email. You should probably receive it by Thursday or Friday, and the webinar replay will be available on the Stylus YouTube channel. So thank you all and have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, thanks, Patty.
Thank you.